Margaret sat at her kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea she'd stopped drinking an hour ago. Her youngest had moved out 6 months earlier. Her marriage had ended before that. The house was quiet in a way that felt different from peaceful. She wasn't sad exactly. She was invisible. If that feeling is familiar, this video is for you. Because what Margaret was experiencing has a name, a cause, and a way through. And it's far more common than anyone admits. Here's something that rarely makes the headlines. Researchers have described loneliness among adults over 50 as one of the most significant and most overlooked public health challenges of our time. A 2018 survey by Cigna found that nearly half of American adults reported feeling alone or left out. Adults over 45 were among the most affected. But the number that surprised even the researchers was this. Of those who described significant loneliness, the majority had kept it entirely to themselves, saying nothing to friends, doctors, or family members. Because loneliness after 50 doesn't always look the way we imagine. It's not always a person sitting in a dark room. Sometimes it's a woman at a dinner party surrounded by people who don't really know her. Sometimes it's a man who retired last year and realizes he has no idea who he is outside of work. Sometimes it's someone whose marriage ended, whose kids moved away, and whose closest friendships quietly dissolved when the shared contexts that held them together disappeared. This kind of loneliness is structural. The scaffolding of connection, the places, routines, and relationships that once organized your social life collapses. Not because you failed, life simply moved. And understanding why it happens is the first step toward understanding how people actually come out the other side. Let's stay with Margaret for a moment. She'd been married for 28 years. Her social life had been almost entirely couple-based, built around dinner parties with other couples, school events with other parents, and a book club her husband had encouraged her to join. When the marriage ended, she told herself she'd be fine. She was 56, healthy, financially stable, and independent. What she didn't account for was this. Her entire social ecosystem had been built around shared contexts. When those contexts disappeared, most of the people did too. Not because anyone was unkind. Adult friendships exist within containers, work, kids' schools, and couples' dinners. Take away the container, and the friendship often doesn't know where to go. Dr. Rebecca Adams, a sociologist who spent decades studying adult friendship, identified 3 conditions that friendships require to form: proximity, repeated unplanned interaction, and a setting that encourages people to lower their guard. After 50, all 3 of those conditions become harder to meet naturally. So Margaret did what many people in her position do. She waited. She told herself the loneliness was temporary. She kept herself busy with renovations, streaming services, and phone calls to her kids on Sunday evenings. And the months passed. If you've ever filled your schedule to avoid feeling how empty it is, you understand what I mean. But here's where Margaret's story takes a turn that the research predicts almost perfectly. Because people who come through loneliness after 50 share a specific set of psychological moves. And the first one is the one nobody expects. For years, there was a quiet assumption in psychology that social personality was largely fixed by adulthood. That if you were introverted or out of practice or just not naturally a joiner, that was more or less who you were going to remain. The neuroscience now tells a different story. Dr. Louise Hockley at the University of Chicago spent over 2 decades studying loneliness and its effects on the nervous system. Her research found that chronic loneliness puts the brain into a state of hypervigilance. It starts scanning for social threat. It becomes more sensitive to rejection, more defensive, harder to approach, and harder to be approached. This is not a character flaw. It is a survival mechanism. A lonely brain is a brain trying to protect itself. But here's what Hockley also found. When people began rebuilding connection, even gradually, even imperfectly, those threat scanning patterns began to quiet. The nervous system recalibrated. The brain at any age responds to genuine social warmth. Now, let's meet Robert. Robert was 64 when his wife of 37 years died. His 2 sons lived out of state. He'd spent his career as an engineer, respected, purposeful, connected to a team. Retirement had come 18 months before his wife's death. He described the first year afterward as the longest of his life, not only because of grief, but because he realized, slowly, that outside of work and his marriage, he had almost no independent social identity left. He knew people. He just didn't have closeness with anyone anymore. When psychologists study adults who successfully rebuild their social lives after 50, they don't find a common personality type. And they don't find extroverts or people who simply decided to try harder. What they find are specific behaviors, specific psychological moves, and the first move is the one nobody expects. Psychologist John Cacioppo, who spent his career studying loneliness at the University of Chicago, identified a consistent pattern in chronically isolated adults that he called motivational withdrawal. The lonelier someone became, the more they pulled back from social situations. Not because they didn't want a connection, because they'd started to anticipate rejection before it even had a chance to happen. The adults who came through loneliness didn't wait until the fear passed. They acted while the fear was still there. They signed up for the class before they felt like going. They texted the neighbor before they had the right words. They showed up slightly uncomfortable and let discomfort be part of the experience instead of a signal to stop. Robert's version of this was a woodworking class at his local community college. He didn't particularly want to go. He told himself it was just something to fill a Tuesday evening. He sat in the back the first night and said almost nothing. He came back the second week anyway. By the fourth session, he was helping a 72-year-old named Dawn fix a joint that wasn't sitting right. Dawn became the first real friend Robert had made in over 20 years. The second psychological move is this. People who genuinely come through loneliness after 50 stop trying to accumulate acquaintances and start seeking something real with one or two people. Susan Pinker, a Canadian psychologist who wrote The Village Effect, studied the relationship between face-to-face contact and well-being across thousands of adults. Her findings were consistent. It's not the number of social connections that matters most for health and happiness. It's the quality of a small handful of close relationships. 2 or 3 genuine friends, people who know you without a performance, have more measurable impact on well-being than 40 pleasant acquaintances. The trap many people fall into is trying to replicate the volume of their younger social lives. What they actually need is to go slower and go deeper with fewer people. This third move is the hardest, and the one that takes the longest to rebuild after a major loss. Brené Brown's research on vulnerability and connection points to this consistently. Real closeness requires the risk of being genuinely known. But after divorce, after loss, after years of managing an image at work or in a marriage, many people over 50 have quietly decided it's too late for that. Or they've been hurt enough that the walls went up and stayed there. The people who come through loneliness do something specific. They practice what researchers call calibrated disclosure. They don't overshare with strangers. They don't stay hidden forever with acquaintances. Gradually, carefully, they let real things about themselves emerge. They pay close attention to who responds with warmth, and they invest there. But there's a fourth move, and it's the one that surprised me most when I found it in the research. Carol was 52 when her husband died suddenly. She'd expected grief. What she hadn't expected was the specific way it reshaped her friendships. Most of her closest relationships had been couple-based. When she became a widow, the dinner party invitations slowed, then stopped entirely. Not from cruelty, just from the particular awkwardness of how adult social life at that age is built around pairs. She had become the wrong shape for the rooms she used to fit into. She found herself doing something she hadn't done since her 20s, starting completely from scratch. And she discovered something almost by accident. She began volunteering at a community garden near her house, not because she loved gardening, but because she needed somewhere real to be on Saturday mornings. She went for 3 weeks before she said more than a few words to anyone. Then, she kept showing up. By the 4th week, she was part of something she couldn't quite name yet. This is what the research consistently shows. Adults over 50 who rebuild meaningful social lives don't usually do it by trying to recreate the friendships of their past. They do it by finding a shared activity or purpose and letting friendship grow sideways from there. Erik Erikson, the developmental psychologist, described the central challenge of midlife and later life as generativity, the drive to contribute to something beyond yourself. His research found that people who found ways to give, to create, to be genuinely useful to something larger than their own life reported significantly higher levels of life satisfaction and social connection. Carol wasn't looking for friends at the garden. She was looking for somewhere to put her grief and her time. The friends came anyway. Within a year, she had 2 friendships she described as the most honest relationships she'd ever had, with no performance required and no shared history to maintain. Just 2 people who had shown up to the same place for real reasons and let something grow. Let me bring the research together here, because the evidence on what actually helps people rebuild connection after 50 is specific enough to be genuinely useful. The Harvard study of adult development is the longest-running study of adult happiness ever conducted, tracking hundreds of people across more than 80 years of life. Dr. Robert Waldinger, the study's current director, has said publicly that the results surprised even the researchers. The clearest predictor of health, happiness, and cognitive sharpness in later life was not wealth, not status, not achievement. It was the quality of relationships, not the number of relationships, how old they were, or whether they were romantic or platonic. What mattered was depth, honesty, and realness. And the research on what actually builds that depth in later life points to a few consistent things. Regularity matters more than intensity. A weekly coffee with one honest friend does more for well-being than a monthly dinner party where you perform okayness for a room full of people. Physical presence matters more than digital contact. Pinker's research found that face-to-face interaction triggers hormonal and neurological responses that phone calls and video chats don't fully replicate. And novelty matters. Arthur Aaron's research at Stony Brook University found that shared new experiences trying something unfamiliar together accelerate how quickly people feel genuinely close, at any age. So what did this actually look like for Margaret, Robert, and Carol? Here's where their stories land. 3 years after that Sunday afternoon with the cold cup of tea, Margaret runs a small writing group that meets at her house every other Thursday. 4 women, 2 men. She started it because she needed something structured and real. She told herself she was just organizing something practical. She didn't expect it to become the part of the week she looks forward to most. She still has moments of loneliness. They are quieter now, and she knows what to do with them. Robert still takes woodworking at the community college. Don, the 72-year-old with the difficult joint, passed away last winter. Robert was one of 4 people at the funeral. He'd written something to be read at the service. He said it was the first time in years he'd felt, as he described it, inside someone else's life rather than watching it from the outside. Carol still goes to the garden on Saturday mornings. Last month, she brought a new neighbor, a woman, 58, recently divorced, who said she didn't particularly love gardening but needed somewhere real to be. There's a line from the Harvard study I keep coming back to. Dr. Waldinger said it simply. Good relationships don't just protect our bodies, they protect our minds. Not perfect relationships, or easy ones, or ones you fell into at 22 and inherited from a marriage or a workplace. Relationships you chose to build, carefully at 52 or 58 or 64, from whatever you had left after life rearranged things. If you're in the quiet right now, the kind that feels less like peace and more like absence, the research is on your side. The biology is on your side. And you are not the exception to this. The loneliness after 50 that nobody talks about is also the loneliness that people come through. Quietly, imperfectly, one small real thing at a time. If this video found you at the right time, the next one goes deeper into the psychology of rebuilding identity after major life transitions, retirement, loss, and the empty nest. It's on screen right now, and if this felt like something someone in your life needs to hear, share it with them. I'll see you in the next one.